The air in the suburban garage was thick, heavy, and stale, saturated with the smell of machine oil, the steely chill of metal, and the faint taste of rubber from the tires neatly stacked in the corner. It was as if the air itself held the memory of endless evenings spent repairing things and long conversations over the sound of tools. Alex froze, his breathing evened out, but tension was building inside him. The dim light from a single overhead lamp cast ragged, uncertain shadows on the cracked concrete floor, making the space seem alien, as if it had been torn from another time. He held a small, unopened packet of condoms in his hand, shiny and new, with no connection to their everyday lives. The glossy cover had an aggressive sheen, as if it held something too personal, too awkward, to simply ignore. It wasn't the brand he and Laura used. Not at all. The neon green of the packaging screamed raw, deliberate sexuality, a defiant confidence trying to cover up the cheapness. Nothing like the laconic, almost ascetic packs they kept in their bedside table drawer, the kind of thing you grew accustomed to, like an old mug or a soft robe. Stable, reliable, common. Alex's thumb slid over the embossed logo, and a cold, tight knot formed in his stomach. Not fear, not jealousy, but some strange, heavy premonition. As if he were confronted not with an object, but with a question he wasn't ready to answer. Not now. Not here. He came across the box by chance when he was looking for the car's paperwork, a simple, routine task. Pull out the old insurance, check the date of the mot. The glove compartment had everything it should have: napkins, a flashlight, an old waybill. And there it was. At first he thought it was a gum wrapper, maybe a leftover receipt from the supermarket. An ordinary thing that you throw away and forget. But as soon as he pulled the find out, the world seemed to rock under his feet. His heart began to pound not quickly, but steadily, dully, like a distant drumbeat, foreshadowing alarm, not panic awareness. He turned the package over, trying to find something. A note, a number, a scrawled name, a clue. But the back was empty, just a glossy green surface, a garish design, and an indifferent barcode, like the seal of a silent sentence. No evidence, just a presence. Laura, his voice cracked, echoing in the empty garage. There was no answer. She was inside, probably curled up on the couch with her laptop, answering emails or scrolling through Pinterest for dinner ideas. The mundane sight was a painful contrast to the object in his hand. He shoved the box into his jacket pocket, the corners digging into his palm, and headed into the house. The kitchen was warm and smelled of roasting garlic as Laura cooked chicken. The pan cracked on the stove, and the air was filled with a cozy, almost deceptively peaceful smell. She was sitting at the kitchen island, her laptop in front of her, her dark hair pulled back into a messy bun, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose. She looked up as he walked in, her eyes lingering on him for a moment. "Did you find the documents?" she asked. Her voice was light, casual, and homely. Alex's throat tightened. He felt a wave rising inside him, words, questions, accusations. He wanted to throw the box on the table, loudly, definitely, demand an explanation, see how she would react. But he didn't. Something inside him pulled back, maybe fear, maybe a weak but still living faith in her, or that everything might not be what it seems. He nodded, trying to speak calmly. Yeah, they were in the glove compartment under the waybill. The voice sounded even, but the lips trembled in an uncertain attempt at a smile. "Thank goodness," Laura said, looking back at her laptop. "This machine is just some kind of lost property storage facility. I once found an old pair of earrings and half a lollipop in there. Can you imagine?" She grinned, not looking at him, and went back to typing. Alex watched her fingers move across the keyboard, adjusting her glasses without taking her eyes off the screen. There was nothing suspicious in her gestures, nothing unnatural. Just an ordinary evening, ordinary Laura. "Are you leaving work early?" he asked, coming closer, putting the keys on the table. "Yeah. Jen's projector died, and the meeting was rescheduled. I decided not to just sit there. I went home. We had some chicken left, so I figured, why not cook it?" She said it somehow simply, without tension, but in his head the emphasis still sounded. "I decided." As if she had planned in advance to be alone. "It smells delicious," he muttered, looking away. "Thank you," she replied. "Would you like some rice or potatoes with it?" He looked at her, and his insides clenched. She didn't look like someone with a secret. But the box was still in his jacket, tangible, real. He could feel it through the fabric, like a weight. "Rice," he finally answered. "Just rice." He stood there, looking at her, the box in his pocket burning through the fabric. His thoughts swirled, creating scenarios. Maybe someone had left it in the car, a friend who'd borrowed it, an accident. But who? They rarely lent the car to anyone. Laura's brother, Mike, had borrowed it last month to move furniture, but Mike was a bachelor, perpetually disorganized, and not exactly the type to carry neon green condoms. Alex's thoughts were drifting deeper and deeper into the dark. He needed to know, but he had to be smart. That night, he couldn't sleep. Laura's steady breathing next to him was a metronome, ticking away his sanity. He stared at the ceiling, the box hidden in his sock drawer, a ghost in his mind. He replayed their life, 7 years of marriage, the mortgage, the evenings together watching Netflix, the quiet mornings over coffee. They weren't perfect, but they felt solid, or so he thought. The thought that Laura was hiding something, lying to him, was like a knife in his chest. But Alex wasn't the type to explode and scream and blame. He was a software engineer, a man who lived by logic, unraveling problems methodically. If there was truth, he would find it, and if there was betrayal, he would make sure there was a price to pay. He kissed Laura goodbye that morning as she left for her job in marketing downtown, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. He waited until her car was pulled out of the driveway before he pulled out the box. He looked it over again, noting the expiration date 2 years in advance. Brand new, unopened. He fired up his laptop and started digging. A quick search by brand showed that they were sold at every gas station and drugstore within a 10-mile radius. Nothing. He checked their joint bank account, scrolling through the transactions, looking for anything suspicious: late-night purchases at convenience stores, unfamiliar charges. Nothing stood out. Laura had always been meticulous with money. If she was hiding something, she was a master at it. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The house was too quiet, a silence that heightened doubt. He needed more data. He grabbed his phone and texted Mike, trying to keep his tone casual. "Hey, did you leave anything in the car when you picked it up last month? Found some junk in the glove compartment." Mike responded quickly, "No, bro, just my coffee thermos." "What did you find?" Alex paused, then typed, "Just some rubbish." A trifle. He wasn't ready to reveal his cards. Not yet. The day dragged on, every minute stretching his nerves like strings. He worked from home, debugging code for a client, but he couldn't concentrate. Every ping from his phone made his heart jump. What was he waiting for? A confession, a hint. When Laura returned, he decided he would watch her, looking for cracks in her mask. If she was lying, sooner or later she would slip up, and he would be ready. Over dinner salmon with asparagus, her signature dish, she chatted about the new campaign at work, her voice clear, her hands gesturing animatedly. Alex nodded, her smile rehearsed, but in his mind he registered everything. The way her eyes darted to her phone when it vibrated, the slight pause before she answered his question about the day. Was it guilt, or was he seeing ghosts where there were none? "Is something wrong?" she asked, tilting her head. Her green eyes looked straight at him, warm, sincere. For a moment, he almost believed she was innocent. "Just tired," he replied, spearing a piece of asparagus. "A day of coding wore me out." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You work too much. Maybe we need a weekend alone, just us." Her words hit him like a fist. Was she trying to distract him? Or was this genuine, a glimpse of the Laura he thought he knew? He forced a laugh. "Yeah, maybe. Somewhere without Wi-Fi." She laughed, and the sound was so familiar, so her made his heart clench. He wanted to believe her. Damn it, how he wanted to. But the box and the drawer whispered something else. In the days that followed, Alex became a detective in his own life. He checked Laura's phone while she was in the shower, frantically scrolling through her messages and emails. Nothing incriminating, but it didn't ease the pressure in his temples. He installed a car tracking app, telling himself it was just to rule out possibilities. The app showed her movements: work, grocery store, favorite coffee shop. Ordinary, boring even. But the ordinariness felt like a mask, too perfect to be trusted. One evening, while Laura was staying late for work drinks, Alex sat in the garage, the glove compartment open again. He checked it every day, secretly hoping the box would disappear, proving it was an accident. But it was there, mocking him. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands when his phone vibrated. An app notification. 2 weeks ago, the car had been parked for 3 hours at a motel on the outskirts of town while he was at a client meeting downtown. His stomach dropped. Laura had said she'd been at work that day. He checked her calendar. No motel. He sat there, holding the box in one hand, the phone in the other, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. The shock was ebbing, replaced by something cold and sharp. He wasn't just hurt, he was angry. But Alex wasn't the type to smash dishes or throw accusations in people's faces. No, he would be smarter than that. If Laura was playing him, he would play her back. He would find the truth, and when he did, he would make her feel the full weight of it. Morning light streamed through the kitchen window, painting the countertop a soft golden hue. Alex sat at the table, clutching a mug of cold coffee, his gaze fixed on the empty space. Laura had already left for work, leaving behind a faint scent of perfume and a familiar silence that now seemed ominous rather than cozy. Last night was spinning in his head, her laughter, the warmth of her hand on his, the offer to go away for the weekend. It all seemed so natural, so like them, that for a second he wondered if he was making this up. But the motel notice clung to his thoughts like a splinter, and the image of the neon green package in the glove compartment returned like an annoying refrain. He sipped his coffee, grimacing with bitterness. They had spent 7 years building their life, brick by brick. Meetings in cafes, awkward first dates when Laura spilled a latte on his shirt and laughed until she cried. She had immediately admitted that she was nervous, and that won him over. He remembered how they had hidden from the rain under the awning of a diner, how they had held hands for the first time, both slightly tense, but not letting go. Their wedding was a hot August day in a small garden outside the city, where everything was homely and simple. Wooden chairs, garlands of lights, wicker baskets with wildflowers. Laura had given up on heels and at one point kicked off her sandals right on the dance floor. She danced barefoot on the grass to an old Simon and Garfunkel song, her skirts flashing in the air, her hair spilling over her shoulders, and he couldn't take his eyes off her. That's when he thought, this is my life. After the wedding, there were simple, real evenings cooking pasta while listening to jazz, arguing about whose turn it was to wash the dishes, trips to IKEA together, where they almost fought over the color of the curtains. Saturdays in the park, when they got takeout coffee and discussed books, or just sat in silence, feeling the time dragging slowly like a family. Birthday letters that they wrote to each other by hand, even when they lived in the same apartment. On the refrigerator, she still had a note from her. Don't forget to be happy today, and water the ficus. The trust between them seemed as unbreakable as the concrete foundation of their house. They shared passwords to their phones, knew each other's habits. Laura always left crumbs on the table, and he always forgot to close the tube of toothpaste. She hated it when he left his socks in the chair. He grumbled about her scattered hairpins. These little things were their code, their language, their special order in the chaos of life. But now every detail seemed like evidence to him. Even crumbs on the table suddenly looked like a trace, like a sign of something missed. He looked into the mug as if into a well, trying to fish out an answer from the depths. Where did they take a wrong turn? Alex stood up, pushing his chair back with a soft creak, and headed for the bedroom. He opened his sock drawer where he'd hidden the box of condoms and pulled it out again. He turned it over in his hands, noticing his fingers shaking slightly. This wasn't just a suspicion, it was a crack in their world, and it was growing wider with each passing second. He put the box back and decided that today he would begin to look for answers more systematically. His engineer's mind demanded structure, a plan. If Laura was hiding something, he would find proof. If she was innocent, he would prove it to himself. But deep down, he was afraid the truth would be worse than he was willing to accept. The first thing he did was go back to Laura's phone. Yesterday, while she was in the shower, he'd only skimmed through her messages. Today, he'd be more thorough. She'd left her phone charging in the living room, and despite his heart pounding with guilt at the intrusion, he unlocked the screen. The code, their anniversary, so 609, was as much a symbol of their closeness as their wedding rings. Scrolling through the chats, he looked for anything out of the ordinary. Unfamiliar names, overly frequent messages, strange emoji. But everything seemed sickeningly ordinary. His colleague Sarah was sending cat memes, his friend Kate was discussing a new TV show, and the work chat was filled with messages about deadlines. He opened her conversation with him. Their last message was about what to buy at the supermarket. "Don't forget the olives," she wrote, adding a winking emoji. He almost smiled, then caught himself. This could be an act. He checked her calls. Several from an unknown number with no name but a local area code. The dates matched the previous week when she had been working late. He wrote the number down on a scrap of paper, figuring he'd run it through a search engine later. Then he opened her notes app, the one Laura liked to jot down to-do lists or random thoughts. The same old stuff was there. Call bank. Buy candles for dinner. Review report for Tom. Tom was her boss, a man Alex had met a few times at company parties. He was tall, with a confident smile and a habit of holding his eyes a little too long. Alex felt something dark brewing in his chest, but he pushed it down. Emotions wouldn't help. He needed facts. He put the phone back and went back to his laptop. Opening a browser, he typed in the name of the motel where the tracker indicated their car was parked. The Sunset Inn was a seedy place on the outskirts of town, with a neon sign and reviews full of complaints about noisy neighbors and stained sheets. Alex pictured Laura walking into one of those motels and shuddered. She was the kind of woman who spent half an hour choosing a wine at a restaurant, who winced at the smell of cheap soap. What could she be doing in a place like that? He found the motel's website, but there was nothing useful there, just outdated photos and a booking form. So he decided to check the cameras. Many motels had cameras at the entrance, and while he wasn't a hacker, his programming skills could help. He found a forum discussing how to access open security cameras through vulnerabilities in old systems. It was a long road, but he was ready. As his laptop hummed, loading network analysis software, Alex thought about the past. He remembered Laura once confessing to having an affair with a married man when she was younger. She was 19, a waitress, and he was her boss. She had told him this with regret, calling herself naive, but Alex hadn't paid attention to it at the time. Now, her words sounded different, like a warning he had ignored. Was she capable of cheating? He had always thought of her as honest, straightforward. But people change. Or maybe he had never really known her. The day passed in a frantic search. He checked their shared cloud drive, where they kept photos and documents. Nothing suspicious: family photos from a Colorado vacation, scanned receipts, her presentations for work. But one folder, simply titled Miscellaneous, was password protected. That was odd. They never put passwords on shared files. He tried their standard combinations: Laura's birthday, their anniversary, the name of their old cat. Nothing worked. He put it aside, deciding to come back later with a password guessing program. By the time Laura got home that evening, Alex was feeling like a shadow of his former self. His eyes were burning from staring at the screen, his back was aching from sitting at his desk, and his thoughts were as jumbled as poorly written code. He pretended to work all day, but the lines just wouldn't come together. He found himself opening the same tab over and over again, with no idea why. Laura walked in, pulling off her coat as she went, and gave him a short smile. "Hi." She put her bag by the wall and went to the kitchen, already on autopilot. "How is your day?" "Fine," he responded and stood up, stretching. "Yours?" "I'm tired." She took a can of coconut milk out of her bag and put it on the table. Today, everyone suddenly decided that they urgently needed to redo the design. Nastia and I almost burned the layout. Classic, he chuckled. Always at the last minute. Yeah, she opened the refrigerator. Did we leave anything from dinner? Or should we order? I think there was rice with chicken. From yesterday. Do you want me to warm it up? Come on. I don't have the energy to cook anything. She sat down at the table, rubbed her eyes, and threw her glasses on the tabletop. I feel like today is Monday, although it's Thursday. Alex opened the refrigerator and took out a container. Everything was ordinary to the point of impossibility, but it was precisely in this ordinariness that something now rang false. He heard his own words, "Fine, I'll warm it up," and felt how an anxious emptiness was growing somewhere deep inside. Having a hard day? She asked, looking at him a little more softly. Yes, the client changed his requirements again. He turned away, focusing on the microwave. The lie had come too easily. It scared him. He had always thought of himself as straightforward, almost to the point of naivety. But now the words came automatically, as if he had practiced them, as if he already knew how to hide the truth. Maybe he really was becoming like her. If she really was lying. If the box wasn't an accident. Have you watched anything today? He asked, just to avoid being silent. Yes, one documentary about a seaweed farm. I stumbled upon it by accident. You know, they make food packaging out of it. You can eat it. Can you imagine? Appetizing, he grinned, placing a plate in front of her. Enjoy. Thank you. Are you with me? A little later, I'll close some work. She nodded, already forking rice, and didn't notice how his gaze lingered on her face. He tried to guess, was she playing, pretending, or was she simply moving on with her life, unaware that in his pocket was a small green box that had changed his day. They ate dinner in relative silence, broken only by her tales of her colleagues and the new project. Alex listened, nodding at the right places, but his mind was elsewhere. He noticed the way she tapped her fingers on the table. Was it a new habit or a nervous tic? The way she checked her phone twice, even though no one was texting. The way her voice wavered slightly when she mentioned she'd be late for a client meeting the following day. Every gesture, every word was now under the microscope of his suspicion. After dinner, while Laura washed the dishes, he returned to his laptop. He launched a network scanning program, trying to access the motel's cameras. It was risky, he didn't want to break the law, but his thirst for the truth was stronger. The program returned several public IP addresses, one of which, judging by the geolocation, could belong to the motel. Access was restricted, but he found an old video from the entrance camera, dated that same day. The quality was terrible, the pixels blurring faces, but he spotted a silver car, similar to their Honda, parked at the edge of the lot. A figure in a dark jacket got out, but he couldn't make out a face. It could have been Laura, or someone else. The uncertainty was the worst of it. He closed the laptop, feeling fatigue mixed with anger. The trust he considered their foundation was crumbling like a house of cards. But he wasn't going to give in. He remembered Laura once saying that she hated lies more than anything in the world. If someone betrays, they must pay, she had said, her eyes shining with conviction. Now those words sounded ironic. If she had broken their agreement, he would find a way to make her regret it. Not by shouting, not by making a scene, he would act coldly, calculatingly, like a chess player planning his moves 10 moves ahead. Before going to bed, he noticed Laura lingering in the bathroom longer than usual. He could hear her speaking softly into the phone, but he couldn't make out the words. When she emerged, her face was calm, but her eyes were slightly red. Crying? Or just tired? He didn't ask. Instead, he lay down next to her, feeling the gap between them grow. His shock was turning into something else, not just pain, but determination. He would be the one to reveal the truth, and if Laura was guilty, she would learn that trust was not something to be played with. No one leaves without counting. The sun was setting, painting the suburban sky in streaks of crimson and orange, when Alex parked his car in the backyard, away from the prying eyes of his neighbors. In his hands was a small package, delivered by courier just an hour ago. Inside was a compact hidden camera, purchased from an online store with a guarantee of complete privacy. He had chosen a high-resolution model with night vision and the ability to record to the cloud. It was not an impulsive move, but a carefully considered one. His engineer's mind demanded proof, irrefutable and clear as lines of code. The suspicions that had tormented him since the day he found the package of condoms had already grown into something more paranoia that gnawed at him from the inside, but he was not going to back down. The truth was the only thing that could either destroy his world or bring it back to life. In the garage, the old refrigerator humming, he unpacked the device. The camera was tiny, the size of a button, with a matte black body that almost blended into the shadows. The instructions promised a simple installation, but Alex spent an hour studying each step to ensure he left no trace. He chose a spot under the dashboard, where the camera would capture the interior and part of the view through the windshield. The wires were neatly tucked behind the trim, plugging the device into a portable battery so it would work independently of the car. Every movement he made was measured, like assembling a complex machine. When he was finished, he wiped the surfaces with a damp cloth to remove fingerprints and stood back, checking the angle of view using an app on his phone. The image was clear. The leather seats, the steering wheel, even the faint glint of the sun on the center console. The camera was invisible, ready to become his eyes. He closed the garage and walked back into the house, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Installing the camera was the point of no return. He had crossed a line where their marriage could never be the same. If Laura was innocent, he would be a traitor, spying on his wife. If she was guilty, he didn't know what he would do with the truth. But he couldn't sit back any longer. Every day without answers was like poison, slowly eating away at his mind. The next day, Laura left for work at 7:45 a.m., as usual. Alex watched her silhouette disappear around the corner from the window and immediately opened the camera app. So far, the footage was empty, just the still interior of the car, bathed in the morning light. He set up notifications for motion and sound so he wouldn't miss anything important. Then he went back to his work, trying to focus on the client project, but his thoughts kept wandering to his phone, to what the camera could show. He imagined Laura getting into a car with someone else, her hand touching someone else's shoulder, the laugh he thought was his own sounding to someone else. The images were like knives, but he forced himself to breathe evenly. He didn't want hate, he wanted facts. By midday, the app beeped. Alex froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The notification read, "Motion detected." He opened the video, expecting the worst. On the screen, Laura was driving, alone, rummaging through her purse. She pulled out lipstick, touched it up while looking in the rearview mirror, and drove away. Nothing out of the ordinary. But his heart was still pounding, as if he were expecting someone to appear in the passenger seat. He saved the recording, noting the time, 12:03. Laura said she was going to lunch with colleagues. He checked the tracker. The car had pulled up at a downtown cafe, the same one where they had once celebrated her promotion. Coincidence? Or part of her game? That evening, when Laura returned, she looked tired but content. She dropped her bag on the couch and stretched, a movement so familiar that Alex felt a pang of guilt. "It's been a crazy day," she said, kicking off her shoes. "Tom had another 3-hour brainstorm. I almost fell asleep." She smiled, but Alex noticed her fingers twitch slightly as she tucked her hair behind her ear. Or was he imagining it? He nodded, feigning interest, but his mind was already running through the next day's plan. He would start checking her words, comparing them with the camera and tracker. If she was lying, he would catch her. The next few days turned into a routine of surveillance. The camera faithfully recorded Laura's every trip, to the office, to the coffee shop, to the supermarket. Nothing suspicious. But Alex was not relaxing. He knew that lies could be as thin as a web and could be revealed in small details. He began recording her schedule, noting when she left and returned, comparing it with the tracker data. One evening, she said she would be late for a meeting with a client, but the tracker showed that the car was parked at a park 5 miles from her office. The camera captured her sitting in the driver's seat, looking at her phone, and then she walked out and disappeared from the frame for half an hour. When she returned, her hair was slightly disheveled, and a shadow of thoughtfulness flitted across her face. Alex watched the recording 3 times, zooming in, but saw nothing concrete, just her silhouette disappearing toward the trees. He dug deeper. He found the unknown number he'd noticed in her calls and entered it into an online database. It was registered to a James Clark, but there was no additional information. The name meant nothing. There was no James in their circle. Alex searched for him on social media, but found dozens of people with that name, and none of the profiles yielded any leads, so he decided to try a different approach. He remembered Laura mentioning a new colleague who'd joined their team a couple of months ago. She described him as charismatic but overly confident. Alex found her company's website and scrolled through the employees section. There was James Clark, a sales manager, with a glossy smile and a look in his eyes that seemed all too familiar. Alex's heart sank. It could be him. He began monitoring her interactions with James. Laura didn't mention him often, but a couple of times her voice would sharpen slightly when she talked about work. James keeps interrupting everyone in meetings, she complained one night over dinner, rolling her eyes. Alex nodded, but his mind was already speculating. Was her reaction genuine, or was it part of her camouflage? He decided to check her email, taking advantage of the fact that she'd left her laptop open. In her inbox, he found several from James' businesslike, matter-of-fact messages about meeting schedules and reports. But one, sent late at night, was personal. "Hey, Laura, it was great chatting today. Maybe we can grab coffee again next week." Alex felt the blood rush to his temples. He checked her response. "Yeah, that sounds good. Let me know when you're free." Nothing revealing, but the tone was too warm for a simple colleague. The camera kept rolling, recording her journeys. One day, she stopped at the same park again, but this time the camera caught someone getting into the passenger seat. A man, his face hidden by a cap. They talked, Laura leaning a little closer to him than necessary. The conversation lasted 10 minutes, then the man got out, and Laura drove away. Alex watched the footage again, slowing down the footage, but the man's face remained indiscernible. He saved the video, adding it to his evidence folder, which had already grown to a dozen files. Tracker screenshots, call records, copies of emails. His paranoia was growing, but he refused to let it get the better of him. He began keeping a journal, jotting down every suspicious moment, every inconsistency. Laura said she was in the office until 8. The tracker showed the car leaving at 6. She claimed to have lunch with Sarah. The camera caught her eating alone in the car. These discrepancies were small, but they added up to a puzzle that increasingly looked like infidelity. But Alex knew that hints alone weren't enough. He needed a smoking gun, a moment that couldn't be explained away by chance or misunderstanding. One night, while Laura slept, he sat in the living room, staring at his phone. The dim light from the screen reflected in his eyes, making them look empty and tired. The camera sent him another notification, a car moving at 2 in the morning. He frowned. Laura was asleep next to him. He remembered clearly, feeling her breathing as he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He opened the app. The tracker showed that the car had been parked at the house the whole time. A mistake? Or had someone started the engine and turned it off without moving? His fingers felt cold. Something was wrong. He put on his sweatshirt and went down to the garage, trying not to make a sound. The car was parked as usual, motionless, and the glass was covered with a light layer of night dampness. He ran his hand over the hood cold. It hadn't started, or had it been long enough for everything to cool down? He opened the door and leaned toward the glove compartment. The box of condoms was still there, but now he noticed that its corner was slightly dented, as if someone had handled it, or tried to open it and then changed their mind, or simply adjusted it, or he had been looking at the box for too long. In the darkness, in the semi-darkness of the garage, it seemed to breathe. His heart began to pound, not sharply, not panikedly, but dully, like a premonition. The thought crept up on him again. Someone had touched it. Or was it all his imagination, swollen by insomnia and doubt? He walked back into the house, tiptoeing like a thief. Laura was still asleep, curled up under the blanket, her breathing even, almost childlike. But he no longer found comfort in that calm. He felt the world around him shrinking, becoming too tight, like a blanket that was too small to keep out the cold. Paranoia was eating away at him from the inside. Every rustle became suspicious. Every glance from Laura was like a mask behind, which someone else was hiding. But he wasn't going to stop. He knew. Trust doesn't crack loudly, it leaves like water through a crack in glass. Almost imperceptibly, but forever. He remembered how once, in one of those conversations that only happened after midnight, Laura had said, "Trust is all we have. If it collapses, everything collapses." He nodded then, unaware how literally he would take those words years later. Now it sounded like a challenge. If she had betrayed him, he would know. He would not scream. He would not make a scene. He would wait, watch, collect the pieces of truth like a puzzle, put together a picture silently, methodically. He would become a shadow, invisible, cold, patient. And when everything came together, she would understand that lies have to be paid for, and not necessarily with anger. Sometimes retribution comes in silence. The morning was gray, with low clouds that seemed to pin the suburbs to the ground. Alex sat in his home office, littered with code printouts and empty coffee cups. His laptop was open, the screen glowing a soft blue that reflected in his tired eyes. The camera in his car worked flawlessly, sending notifications of every move. Over the past 2 days, it had recorded Laura's short trips, to the office, to a coffee shop, to the parking lot of her favorite bookstore. Nothing out of the ordinary, but each new clip made his heart beat faster, as if he were waiting for the blow that was inevitably coming. This morning, the app beeped again, and he gritted his teeth as he opened the latest recording. The video began with a familiar view, the inside of their Honda, bathed in the dim light of an overcast day. Laura was behind the wheel, her fingers tapping on the steering wheel as she waited at a stoplight. Alex had grown accustomed to her small gestures, the way she adjusted the rearview mirror, the way she hummed along to the radio. But a minute later, the passenger door opened and a man climbed in. His face was partially obscured by shadow, but Alex recognized him immediately. Richard, her boss. The same one whose glossy smile flashed across the company's website. Only now he was here, in their car, in their lives. The man wore a dark gray suit, his tie loosened as if he had just emerged from a long meeting. His movements were confident, almost possessive, as he tossed a leather briefcase into the back seat. Everything about him, his walk, his bearing, even the way he looked at Laura, spoke of a habit of control. Laura turned to him, her lips twitching in a small, almost embarrassed smile. She said something, and he responded. But the camera's microphone was too weak to pick up any meaning, just a muffled murmur of voices, like the echo of a conversation behind a wall. Alex leaned closer to the screen, as if looking at it might give the words a clarity they didn't have. Pointless. He didn't blink. His fingers curled around the edge of the table, white with tension, as he watched the man Richard. It was Richard, no doubt about it, lean closer. His hand touched Laura's shoulder, casually, confidently. She didn't pull away. Instead, her body responded. She turned slightly toward him, as if she had forgotten about the world outside the car. And then it happens. Richard leans closer, their faces coming closer, too close to be accidental. And Laura responds. Their lips meet in a kiss that would be impossible to mistake for friendship. It was not a passing touch, not a careful testing of the waters. It was hungry, passionate, as if they had been holding themselves together for a long time, and now the dam had broken. Laura's hands slid to his neck. Richard's fingers sank into her hair, confident, familiar. Their movements were coordinated, almost ritualistic. The camera, with indifferent precision, recorded every frame, every touch, every tilt of the head, every moment that cut Alex as sharply as a knife through the living. He couldn't look away, although everything inside screamed stop. Rewind. Close. The kiss lasted less than a minute, but for him it was an eternity, dying little by little, blow by blow. When they finally pulled away, Laura looked away, turned to the window. Her cheeks were pink, and Richard leaned back in his seat, grinning with the smug charisma Alex had seen in the photo, too confident, too comfortable with his wife. It took Alex a moment to realize that he was no longer breathing. The video ended as Laura started the car, and they drove away. The screen went black, but Alex continued to stare into space, his breathing heavy and ragged. He had expected something like this, had braced himself for the worst, but reality hit harder than he could have imagined. This wasn't just evidence, it was a death sentence. His wife, the woman he'd shared his bed, his plans, his life with, was kissing another man in their car. And not just any man, but Richard, her boss, a married businessman whose reputation in their town was almost legendary. Alex knew enough about him. Successful, charming, with a wife and 2 kids, a house in an upscale neighborhood, and a habit of showing up to charity events with a perfect smile. Now that smile was for Laura. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the world crumble around him. His hands were shaking, but he forced himself to take a deep breath. Anger was bubbling inside him, but he wasn't going to give in to it. Not now. He was an engineer, a man who solved problems one step at a time, and this problem, while tearing him apart from the inside, would be no exception. He saved the video, naming the file 04_27_25_13_13_45, the date and time now seared into his memory. Then he copied it to an encrypted external drive, which he kept in a safe under his desk. This wasn't just a recording, it was a weapon, and he was going to use it wisely. Alex stood up and paced the room, trying to calm the storm in his head. He remembered seeing Richard once at Laura's office party. He'd shaken his hand, his palm firm, his eyes appraising, as if he were sizing her up. Alex hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now every detail came to him with new clarity. Richard was the type of man who always got what he wanted: power, money, attention. And now it seemed he wanted Laura. But why her? What had made her cross the line? Alex knew their marriage hadn't been perfect. There had been arguments about finances, about whether to have children, about her long work hours. But he'd never thought it was enough to make her look for someone else. He opened his laptop and began searching for information about Richard. Social media, business profiles, articles in local publications, anything that might provide more context. Richard Clark, 42, had run the marketing agency where Laura worked for the past 5 years. His LinkedIn was filled with recommendations from colleagues praising his leadership skills and strategic thinking. On Instagram, his wife, Emily, posted photos of their perfect life: family dinners, yacht trips, charity galas. But Alex noticed that in recent months, her posts had become less frequent, her smiles more forced. Was it because of Laura, or was he seeing things that weren't there again? He found an article in the local paper about a recent agency project, which mentioned Richard and Laura as a core team. The photo that accompanied the article showed them side by side, her hand on his shoulder, his gaze fixed on hers with a faint warmth. Alex zoomed in, studying their postures, their expressions. This was more than a professional intimacy. He felt his anger rising again, but he pushed it down. Emotions would only get in the way. He needed to think, to plan, to act. Laura returned home that evening, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. She walked into the kitchen, where Alex was preparing dinner shrimp pasta, her favorite. He had deliberately chosen something difficult to keep his hands and mind busy, to avoid giving himself away. She hugged him from behind, her chin resting on his shoulder. "It smells divine," she said, her voice soft, almost caressing. Alex tensed, but forced a smile as he turned to face her. "I thought I'd spoil you," he said, trying to sound natural. But every gesture she made now felt like a lie. Her touch, her smile, her words, everything was tainted by what he'd seen on the tape. He watched her set the table, hum a tune, adjust a strand of her hair. It had all been so familiar, but now it felt foreign, as if he were watching an actress playing his wife. Over dinner, she told him about a new client, how Richard had saved the day at a meeting, convincing everyone with his charisma. Richard's name was jarring, but Alex nodded, pouring her more wine. He noticed the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her boss, the way her voice became a little more animated. It was subtle, but it was a red flag to him. He asked innocent questions, fishing for details: where the meeting was, who else was there, how long it lasted. Laura answered without hesitation, but he knew he had to check her words. He no longer believed a single sentence she offered. After dinner, he went to the office, citing urgent work. After closing the door, he opened the video again, running it in slow motion. Each frame was a punch, her fingers clutching Richard's collar, his hands sliding around her waist, their breathing almost in sync. He paused the video at the moment where Laura pulled away, her lips still glistening from the kiss. Her gaze wasn't guilty, but thoughtful, as if she were weighing what to do next. That made him even angrier. She didn't look like a victim trapped in passion. She looked like someone who had made a choice. Alex began to make a plan. He wasn't going to make a scene, throw accusations, or break furniture. That wasn't his style. He wanted Laura to feel the consequences, but not too quickly, not too harshly. He would start gathering more evidence, so that neither she nor Richard had a chance to get away with it. He would check their emails, find a way to access her work laptop, where there might be more emails. He would think of a way to use the recording not to blackmail her, but to make the truth boomerang on them both. Maybe he would send the video anonymously to Richard's wife, Emily, to shatter their perfect facade. Or he would find a way to frame Richard at work so that his reputation would be torn apart. Ideas swirled in his head, each one sharper than the last. He also decided to keep a closer eye on Laura. He would start recording their conversations at home, using the voice recorder on her phone to catch her in a lie. He would check her bag, her clothes, looking for traces, the smell of someone else's cologne, a stray receipt, anything that might confirm his worst fears. He knew this was a recipe for disaster, but he couldn't stop. His pain had become fuel, his paranoia a weapon. Before bed, Laura walked into the office, her silhouette in the doorway. "You're late today," she said, her voice soft but with a hint of worry. Alex looked at her, and for a second he wanted to spill the beans, to show the video, to demand an explanation. But he just nodded, closing his laptop. "Yes, the project is burning," he lied, standing up. She came closer, her hand sliding over his shoulder, but he felt only cold. He knew that these touches were a lie, part of her game. And yet he let her hold him, because he knew that his time would come. He would not say anything until he was ready, until he had gathered enough for her world to collapse like his. Lying in bed, he stared into the darkness, listening to her breathe. The thought of her sleeping next to him after what he had seen was almost too much to bear. But he forced himself to close his eyes. He was not just a victim. He was a strategist, plotting a plan. Richard and Laura thought their secret was safe, but they were wrong. Alex would find a way to make them pay, not with screams, not with anger, but with cold, calculated revenge that would leave them with no chance to defend themselves. The silence in the house was deafening, as if the air had thickened, become viscous and heavy. Alex sat in his office, surrounded by shadows cast by the single light on his desk. His laptop screen was dark, but the image was still burning in his mind. Laura and Richard, their lips locked in a kiss, her fingers clinging to his collar, his hand resting confidently on her waist. It wasn't just a picture, it was a wound, deep and bleeding, tearing through everything he considered his life. His chest was tight, as if all the oxygen had been squeezed out of it. He tried to breathe, but the air felt hot, burning his throat. He stood up, his movements jerky, almost convulsive. The room spun, the walls closing in on him, threatening to crush him. He grabbed his phone, the camera app still open, and without thinking, he threw it against the wall. The screen cracked with a dull crunch, shards of glass splashing onto the floor like stars falling from the sky. The sound was sharp, but it did not bring relief. Instead, the anger he had so carefully contained burst forth like lava, burning everything in its path. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, leaving crimson crescents. His gaze fell on the laptop, and for a second he imagined smashing it too, sweeping everything off the table, papers, cups, a lamp, to destroy this world that now seemed alien to him. But he stopped. His breathing was heavy, ragged, like a cornered animal. He would not be this man, the one who lost control, the one who drowned in rage. He was not a victim. He would not let Laura and Richard make him weak. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to count to 10, each count an anchor, holding him back from the edge. When he opened his eyes, the room was still there, but the chaos inside him was beginning to recede, giving way to something colder, sharper. Alex went down to the kitchen, where the bottle of bourbon he and Laura kept for special occasions sat in the cabinet. He pulled it out, dust on the glass crumbling under his fingers. He wasn't a drinker, but he needed something to numb the pain that pulsed in his chest like an open wound. He poured himself half a glass, the amber liquid splashing against the sides. The first sip burned his throat, the second dulled the edges of his thoughts. He sat at the kitchen island, looking out at the dark window, where his face was reflected pale, with dark circles under his eyes, like a man he barely recognized. The bourbon didn't help. It only made the pain more tangible, as if someone had carved its contours with a knife. He remembered their first anniversary. Laura had thrown a surprise dinner on the roof of their old apartment, where it smelled of damp and wet slate. She had hung up garlands bought at a garage sale, set the table with plastic glasses, and brought wine they couldn't afford. She had laughed when the wind blew out the candles, and her eyes had shone in a way that made him think, "Here it is, my eternity." That night he took a picture of her, laughing, glass raised, lights in her hair. He kept the photo on his phone to this day. Now that image was tarnished, brightly, irrevocably. He remembered how she had once caught a cold and refused to admit it, sneezed, laughed hoarsely, and still insisted on an evening walk, because sunsets don't wait. He had wrapped her in his scarf and held her hand as they walked through an empty park. For weeks afterward, she remembered how he had cooked her broth and carried oranges as if it were a feat. Her gratitude then had been so sincere, so alive. And now, it all seemed like a scene played out for him alone. He remembered how she had cried once when he had given her a book she had been looking for since she was a teenager. She had said that no one had ever listened to her so attentively. She had hugged him tightly and remained silent for a long time, her nose buried in his neck. He could feel her breath trembling. It had been one of those rare, pure moments when it seemed like you were exactly where you needed to be, with the right person. Now, every touch of hers, every laugh, every "I love you" sounded in his memory like a lie, like a carefully rehearsed role. How long had she been playing? Months? Years? He tried to pick out the moments when she might have moved away, when her gaze was somewhere off to the side, when her smile didn't reach her eyes. But it all merged into one murky spot, like water with ink diluted in it. The changes were too soft, the nuances too subtle. He didn't notice it then. He didn't want to notice it. He felt like a blind man who had only just begun to see. Without remembering, he deciphered it, like a detective at a crime scene. All those evenings on the couch watching movies, with her sitting a little further away. All the "I'm tired," all the "let's do it tomorrow," all the nothing, just the mood. He accepted it as part of life, or maybe as excuses he told himself. Now every memory is a splinter under the skin. Everything that was once sacred has become suspect. Every happy moment is incriminating evidence. He lost the past before he finally lost the present. The bourbon was gone faster than he expected. He set the glass down, his fingers shaking, but not from the alcohol, from the realization. The betrayal hadn't been a kiss in the car. It had been the destruction of their world, their promises, their future. He thought of the children they'd never had, their plans to travel to Italy, how she'd promised to be there for him forever. Those promises were as empty now as the cracked screen of his phone. He stood up unsteadily and walked to the sink to splash water on his face. Cold drops trickled down his cheeks, bringing clarity back. He wouldn't let himself drown in this. He wouldn't be a victim. Back in the office, he picked up his shattered phone. The screen was a web of cracks, but it still worked. He plugged it in and opened the camera app, checking to see if he'd missed anything. The video of the kiss was still there, like a poison he couldn't get rid of. He forced himself to watch it again, each frame a blow. But now he watched it not with pain, but with cool detachment. He began to notice details he'd missed the first time. The way Laura pulled back slightly at the end, the way her fingers paused on the steering wheel, the way Richard looked at her with predatory confidence. This hadn't been a spontaneous moment of passion. This was part of something bigger, and he was about to find out what. He pulled out his old laptop, the one Laura had never touched, and began organizing everything he had. He created a new folder called Evidence and moved the videos, the tracker screenshots, the copies of the emails from Richard, the notes on her schedule. He added notes, dates, times, places where Laura had lied about her location. This was his fortress, his database that would form the basis for his next move. He didn't know what that move would be, but it would be laser-focused. He wouldn't let his emotions get the better of him. The pain that had been burning inside him was now the fuel for his plan. He remembered Laura once telling him about a friend whose husband had betrayed her. "I would never forgive," she had said, her voice shaking with conviction. "Betrayal is the worst thing you can do to a person." Now she mocked him. She had become what she was judging. But Alex wasn't going to play by her rules. He wouldn't make a scene or scream or beg her to explain. He would be the shadow that followed her, collecting every piece of her lies until he could produce a bill. By midnight, he was sitting in the living room, surrounded by darkness. Laura was asleep upstairs, her breathing probably even calm, as if she hadn't destroyed their world. He opened a bottle of water to wash away the taste of bourbon and began to think about Richard. This man, with his perfect life, his power and charisma, was more than just Laura's lover. He was the symbol of everything Alex despised: arrogance, impunity, the ability to take what wasn't his. Alex decided he would learn everything about him. He would find his weaknesses, his secrets. If Richard thought he could invade other people's lives without consequences, he was wrong. He opened his browser and dug deeper. He found old interviews with Richard, where he talked about work-life balance, how his wife Emily was his rock. Alex almost laughed at the irony. He found her social media profile and began poring over her posts. Emily was pretty, with soft features and a tired look in her eyes. Her most recent photos were of her children, 2 boys, aged 7 and 10, on a football pitch. But in the comments, someone had mentioned that Richard was rarely home. That was a clue. If his marriage was falling apart, this could be leveraged. Alex also decided to check the financial trail. He knew Laura and Richard could leave traces: hotels, restaurants, gifts. He logged into their joint bank account, but found nothing. Then he remembered that Laura had a credit card she rarely mentioned. He found her statement in a desk drawer: small transactions, coffee, cabs, but one purchase caught his eye. A flower shop last week, $75. Laura hadn't brought flowers home. He wrote it down, deciding to check the shop later. His mind went back to the video. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Laura had looked in that moment, not guilty, but almost triumphant. That was the worst part. She didn't look like someone who'd been caught. She looked like someone who knew what she was doing. It spurred his resolve. He wouldn't be the one wallowing in pain. He'd be the one who turned the game around. By morning, he was exhausted, but his clarity was razor-sharp. He cleaned up the evidence of his breakdown: the shattered phone, the empty bottle of bourbon, and made coffee as if nothing had changed. When Laura came downstairs, her hair was disheveled, her smile sleepy. "Good morning," she said, kissing his cheek. He nodded, hiding the storm inside. She didn't notice the way his eyes followed her, the way he memorized her every gesture. He knew his time would come. He wouldn't say anything until he was ready, until his plan was perfect. The pain was still there, but now it was his ally, guiding him toward a revenge that would not be loud, but devastating. Every love is a stone in the direction of betrayal, and a subscription is your support for our cause. Together, we are stronger. It was a cold Tuesday morning, with a sharp wind that blew fallen leaves through the suburban streets. Alex sat in his office, surrounded by silence, broken only by the soft hum of his laptop. His eyes, red from lack of sleep, were glued to the screen, where a list of steps was slowly growing in a word processor. The pain that had torn him apart yesterday was now transformed into a cold determination, like a steel blade honed to perfection. He was not going to scream, make a scene, or slam his fist on the table. His revenge would be different: precise, methodical, like a program written without a single error. Laura and Richard had destroyed his world, and now he would destroy theirs, but he would do it in a way that would leave no doubt about their guilt. His first move was to focus on Richard. This man, with his polished charisma and impeccable reputation, was not just Laura's lover, but also a symbol of betrayal. Alex knew that people like Richard thrived on their image, the facade of a successful businessman, a family man, a pillar of society. If that facade crumbled, Richard would lose everything. Alex opened his browser and began digging deeper than ever before. His programming skills gave him an advantage. He could find information that wasn't readily apparent. He started with the financial trail. As the head of a marketing agency, Richard would likely have access to large accounts and contracts. Alex found the company's public reports, available through a corporate filing database. Nothing suspicious at first glance. The agency showed steady growth, contracts with major clients, awards for innovation. But Alex knew that perfect facades often conceal cracks. He joined a forum where corporate scandals were discussed and began searching for mentions of the agency. One user, hidden under the handle insider_97, hinted at rumors that Richard was using corporate funds for personal use. It was a thin thread, but Alex seized on it. He downloaded open-source software that could track transactions involving public companies. Within hours, he found a discrepancy: several small payments to an obscure firm registered to an offshore address. The name of the firm, Bright Horizon Consulting, meant nothing to him, but he noticed that the payments coincided with Richard's travel to conferences Laura had mentioned. It could have been a coincidence, but Alex suspected it was a scam. He saved the data, determined to dig deeper. The next step was to gather information about Richard's personal life. Alex knew his wife, Emily, might be the key. He studied her social media, paying attention to details. She had rarely posted photos with Richard in recent months, and her posts were filled with solitary walks and snapshots of her children. He found her profile on a local book club website and noticed that she had recently left a comment about a relationship book. It was a hint of marital problems, and Alex figured Emily might be an ally if he framed the information correctly. He composed an anonymous email address and prepared a letter that he had no intention of sending yet. In it, he planned to attach the video from the car, but with Laura's face edited out not out of pity for her, but to make the attack solely aimed at Richard. He wanted Emily to know the truth, but not right away. First, he needed to make sure he had enough evidence to prevent Richard from getting away with it. He also considered sending an anonymous tip to the IRS about suspicious transactions. If Richard was indeed laundering money through offshore companies, that could be the end of him. At the same time, Alex began to prepare the legal groundwork for his break with Laura. Everything in him was pushing him toward a decision that seemed inevitable. He knew they were at the end. But his end was not meant to be quiet. He didn't want to just say, "Go away," and split the property in half as if nothing had happened. He wanted Laura to understand the cost of betrayal. He wanted her to feel the same helplessness he felt when he looked at the camera. Through a colleague, he found a lawyer, a woman named Catherine Woods. The colleague simply said, "She's not afraid of blood. If you want to come out clean, go to her." Her name came up in a few more conversations. Experienced, level-headed, specializing in complex divorce cases, especially where finances, property, and moral superiority are at stake. He booked the appointment, choosing the middle of the workday when Laura was in a meeting. He took the day off, lying that he was feeling ill. It all happened in a small but well-appointed office in the city center, with windows overlooking a noisy street, the muted hum of traffic creating a sense of sterile detachment. No emotion, no story, just the facts. Catherine Woods was a woman in her 50s, with short hair and a perfectly tailored gray suit. She had sharp features and a sharp gaze that seemed capable of boring into a person. She greeted him stiffly, offered him a drink, and got straight to the point, as if everything in between was a formality. Alex told her his story. The suspicions, the box in the car, the notification from the camera, the kiss that changed everything. He tried to keep his voice calm, but there was still a tremor of rage in his voice, a dull, seething rage. He didn't speak directly of revenge, but she seemed to sense it in the tension in his jaw, in the way he held his hands. as if he were holding himself back. Catherine listened to everything, making notes in a leather notebook. Not a single sigh of sympathy, not a drop of sentimentality, just analysis. "If you want a divorce on your terms," she said, putting down her pen, "we need to prove her guilt. The video is a good start, but it's not enough. If it was taken on private property, we may be questioned about the legality of the recording. We need more. Text messages, times and dates, proof of consistency, perhaps third-party testimony. Someone who saw them together, someone who can confirm a relationship beyond friendship." Alex nodded silently. He had already started archiving their chats. In his head, he had a list of people Laura knew, friends, colleagues, people she often met, supposedly for coffee. Now every name was under suspicion. And you need to get your finances ready. Anything that's in your name or both of your names, bank accounts, mortgages, joint investments. If you want to protect assets, especially premarital assets, we'll have to lay everything out carefully. Does it work? Yes. UX designer. She has a stable salary. Catherine nodded, already weighing her options. Okay, that's important. The court will take into account whether she has financial independence. But Alex, you must understand, this will not be a quick process, and not a clean one. You will have to be cool, polite, and not deviate from the line one step. No hysterics, no threats, no abrupt steps. Anything you do now can be used against you. Are you ready for that? He looked into her eyes, and for the first time in all this time, he felt a strange calm. Not because it became easier, but because a plan had appeared. "Ready," he replied. "She won't know a word until it's ready." Catherine nodded slightly, almost satisfied. Then she took hold of the pen again. "Then let's begin." Alex nodded, his mind already racing with the list. Their house was in their names, but most of the savings were in his account. He'd always been the primary breadwinner. He knew Laura was entitled to half the property under state law, but Catherine suggested a strategy: prove that her infidelity had damaged the marriage to minimize her share. "It won't be easy," she warned. "The courts don't like emotional arguments, but if you have the evidence, we can build a case." She gave him a list of documents: bank statements, tax returns, even receipts from recent months that might show Laura's unusual spending. Back home, Alex began gathering papers. He found their joint tax returns, mortgage statements, even an old receipt for a car repair that Laura had paid in cash. He also checked her purse while she was in the shower and found a receipt from a florist he already knew about. It wasn't just any bouquet, it was a delivery, addressed to someone named RK at the agency's office. His heart sank, but he forced it down, snapping a photo of the receipt and adding it to his evidence folder. His plan was beginning to take shape. He divided it into 3 parts: destroy Richard's reputation, secure his own legal defense, and leave Laura without support. For Richard, he continued to dig up financial trails. He found a contact for a local newspaper reporter who covered corporate scandals and composed an anonymous letter hinting at fraud at the agency. He didn't send it right away, deciding to wait until he had more evidence. He also set up a program to monitor public databases that might catch new transactions related to Bright Horizon Consulting. For Laura, he decided to step up his surveillance. He set up a second camera, this time in their living room, hidden in a decorative frame on a shelf. It was risky, but he wanted to record her conversations, especially if she was on the phone with Richard. He also began checking her work laptop when she left it at home. Using file recovery software, he found a draft of an email Laura had started but never sent. "Rich, we need to be careful. I don't want this to blow up." It was another nail in the coffin of their marriage, and Alex kept it, adding it to his arsenal. His meetings with his lawyer became regular. Catherine helped him draft a divorce agreement in which he cited infidelity as the reason for the breakup. She also advised him to open a separate account and transfer some of his savings into it to protect them from Laura's possible claims. "Do it quietly," she said. "If she suspects you're plotting, she may act first." Alex followed her advice, transferring small amounts through online banking, disguising them as payments for freelance projects. Every night when Laura came home, he played the role of the loving husband. He cooked dinner, asked about her day, even laughed at her jokes, although every word came with difficulty. He noticed how she sometimes looked at him with a little worry, as if she sensed that something was wrong. But she said nothing, and he said nothing either. His silence was his strength. He waited until all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. One night, he received a notification from his software, a new payment from the agency to Bright Horizon. The amount was larger than before $10,000, transferred the day before. He began looking for information about the recipient and found that the firm was connected to another businessman whose name had appeared in old articles about Richard. It was a clue that could lead to more. He sent an anonymous request to the IRS through their online form, attaching screenshots of the transactions. He knew it could take months, but even the hint of an investigation could damage Richard's reputation. His plan was almost complete. He imagined Richard losing his job, his name in the headlines, Emily leaving with the kids. He imagined Laura standing before him, homeless, penniless, no excuses. But he was in no hurry. Every step had to be perfect. He didn't want to just punish them, he wanted them to feel their world crumbling, just as he had. He would be the architect of their downfall, and no one would be able to blame him. His revenge would not be loud, but silent, like a virus that infiltrates a system and destroys it from within. Wednesday morning was deceptively quiet, with pale sunlight breaking through a thin layer of clouds. Alex sat at the kitchen table, clutching a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. His gaze was fixed on his laptop, where a folder labeled Finale held the file he'd just found the video of Laura and Richard kissing. His plan, laid out with cold precision, was ready to strike. He was no longer a man tormented by pain or doubt. He had become an architect of destruction, and today he would begin to destroy their world, not with screams or fists, but with one precise move that would leave Richard without a reputation and Laura without a foothold. Alex knew that a scene in their home, with shouting and accusations, would achieve nothing. Laura could lie, make excuses, cry, and he didn't want to see her cry not because he felt sorry for her, but because it could weaken his resolve. Instead, he chose a public blow that would affect not only their personal lives, but also Richard's professional career. He wanted the consequences to be irreversible, so that everyone who knew Richard as a successful businessman would see his true face, and he knew how to do it. He started by preparing the video. Opening an editor, he trimmed the footage to just the key moment, a passionate kiss that lasted just over 20 seconds. He sharpened the footage so that the faces were recognizable, but added a subtle filter so that no one would suspect that the video was filmed with a hidden camera. Then he created 3 anonymous email addresses through an encrypted service that guaranteed privacy. The first address was for Richard, the second for his wife Emily, and the third for the HR department of the agency where Laura worked. He composed 3 emails, each with the same video but different text. For Richard, the email was short and snarky. Did you think no one would know? Now everyone will see who you really are. For Emily, he took a softer tone so as not to scare her off. I'm sorry you have to see this, but you deserve the truth. Your husband is not who he seems. For HR, he wrote formally, as if from a concerned employee. I have enclosed evidence of inappropriate behavior by your manager that is damaging the company's reputation. Please review this according to your policies. He checked every word to ensure there was no trace that could be traced back to him. His IP address was hidden via VPN, and the emails were scheduled to go out at the same time at noon, when Richard and Laura would be in the office. Alex leaned back in his chair, his fingers trembling slightly with adrenaline. This wasn't just a step, it was a leap into the abyss, from which there would be no turning back. He imagined Richard's face when he opened the letter, his confident smile turning to panic. He imagined Emily reading the letter in her cozy home, her world collapsing just as he had. And Laura, her shock, her attempts to explain, her fear when she realized it was all out in the open. He didn't feel joy, but he felt a strange satisfaction, like an engineer completing a difficult project. Before sending it, he decided to double down. He recalled his findings about Richard's financial fraud payments to an offshore account called Bright Horizon Consulting. He composed another anonymous letter addressed to a local newspaper that specialized in corporate scandals. In the letter, he hinted at questionable transactions, attaching screenshots he had collected earlier. He did not mention Richard directly, but he did mention the agency and the dates of the payments. If the IRS launched an audit, it would be another nail in the coffin of Richard's career. He scheduled this letter to be sent the following day, so as not to overload the events of one day. At 11:55, he checked again. The emails were ready, the VPN was working, the files were encrypted. He closed the laptop and walked out into the backyard to breathe in the cold air. The sky was clear, but a storm raged in his chest. He wasn't sure how far the fallout would go, but he knew it was just the beginning. His plan wasn't just about exposure, he wanted Richard and Laura to feel their lives falling apart at the seams, just like his own was. At noon, the letters were gone. Alex was sitting in a small cafe in the city center with brick walls, a slightly peeling sign, and a cloyingly polite barista. He had chosen this place on purpose, far from home, far from Laura. He didn't want to feel her breath during these hours, didn't want to hear the floor creak by the front door when she came home. Everything was going to happen without him. He ordered an espresso, but never touched it. The black liquid had cooled, leaving a dark residue on the sides of the cup. Alex sat with his phone in his hands, his gaze glued to the screen. The anticipation was almost physical. His throat was dry, his heart was beating with a harsh, mechanical precision. He knew the news would come, and it did. By 2 o'clock, his social media monitoring software was registering a surge in activity. Hundreds of messages. The agency's corporate Slack channel, which he'd accessed through an old account he'd forgotten in its browser, was in a panic. He watched in real time as people sent each other messages. "Did you see this? Richard was called to HR. There's something serious going on. They say there's some kind of video, and that he's with one of ours." Alex felt the corners of his lips twitch in a fleeting, barely noticeable smile. Not joy, no. Satisfaction. The wheels were turning. No shouting, no scenes. Just movement. Strategy. By 3 o'clock, the first article appeared on the local news feed. Marketing agency scandal. Manager caught behaving inappropriately. No names, no details, but hints. It was mentioned that a video sent by an anonymous source had triggered an internal investigation. Richard was suspended. The company issued an official comment, promising to be completely transparent. Alex knew this was just the beginning. He didn't feel the triumph he'd imagined. There was no surge of emotion, just emptiness and a slight dizziness, like after a long dive. He refreshed Emily's social media page, Richard's wife. Everything was gone. Family photos, posts about their weekends, trips together. Just a standard profile picture and silence. Emily's silence spoke louder than words. She knew. He turned off the screen and leaned back in his chair. A bus was passing by, people were rushing with coffee, someone was laughing an ordinary day, an ordinary city. Only in one corner of this city, the mask had fallen, and he saw it. He had started it. And this is not the end. That evening, Laura returned home earlier than usual. Her face was pale, her eyes red, as if she had been crying. She dropped her bag on the floor and looked at Alex, but said nothing. He met her gaze, remaining calm even though his heart was pounding inside. "Having a rough day?" he asked, his voice even almost indifferent. She nodded, muttering something about an urgent project, and went into the bathroom. Alex knew she was lying. He knew she had seen the video, or at least heard about it, but he remained silent. His silence was his strength. Dusk had settled over the suburbs, painting the streets in soft shades of blue and gray. In Alex's house, the only light was in the living room, where he sat on the couch, surrounded by silence, broken only by the occasional tick of the wall clock. On the coffee table in front of him sat a cardboard box, carefully taped shut, and next to it a small suitcase he had pulled out of the closet. Laura's things, her clothes, her books, her makeup were gathered with methodical care, as if he were cataloging a life she no longer deserved to share with him. His plan, which had begun with the destruction of Richard, was now approaching its final act, a blow to Laura that would not just be a breakup, but a demonstration of her own fall. He would not scream or stoop to a fight. His revenge was cold as steel, and tonight it would reach its culmination. Alex spent the morning finalizing his arrangements. He contacted Catherine, his lawyer, to confirm that the divorce papers were ready. She assured him that the evidence, the video, the text messages, the receipt from the flower shop was strong enough for the court to recognize Laura's infidelity as grounds for divorce. That would minimize her claim to their marital assets, including the house Alex had been paying for over the years. He also transferred the remaining savings to a new account that Laura didn't know about, disguising the transactions as payments for consulting services. His actions were as precise as a code, with each line serving a purpose. He decided he wouldn't make a scene in Laura's office or send the video to her coworkers. That would be too easy, too similar to what he'd done to Richard. For Laura, he wanted something more personal, but no less devastating. He wanted her to face the truth alone, without the opportunity to justify herself or shift blame. He prepared his laptop, plugging it into the living room TV. The video of the kiss was downloaded, ready to play. He also printed out a copy of her draft letter to Richard, "Rich, we need to be more careful," and placed it next to the box, the final touch to his indictment. Laura came home around 7 o'clock. Her steps in the hallway were heavy, as if she were carrying the weight of the last few days on her shoulders. The scandal with Richard that had spread around town had clearly taken its toll on her. Alex had noticed it in her sunken face, in the way she avoided his gaze, in her short, evasive answers at dinner. Tonight she had walked into the living room, dropping her bag on the floor, and had stopped when she saw the box and suitcase. Her eyes widened, her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Alex sat still, his hands in his lap, his gaze fixed on her, not with anger, but with the cold clarity of a judge passing a sentence. "What is it?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse, broken, as if something inside had cracked. She pointed at the box, but her gaze had already darted to the suitcase. She understood, or almost everything. Alex stood up slowly, almost ceremoniously, like a judge about to read his sentence. He picked up the TV remote and silently pressed a button. The screen flashed coldly, and everything became clear: the interior of the car, the gray afternoon sky outside the windows, her in the driver's seat, Richard beside her. Their bodies, their looks, their touches. Words were unnecessary. The sound was off, but the gestures screamed. He watched her, his gaze fixed on her, like a surgeon looking at an X-ray, already knowing the diagnosis. When the kiss on the screen finally killed any remaining doubts, Laura took a step back, as if she could physically run from the truth. Her hand tightened on her chest, her breathing became ragged. Alex was silent. He waited for the video to end. For the last scene, her glance out the window, his smirk to fade into black. Only then did he speak. His voice was even, almost icy. "You are a complete liar, Laura." He looked straight into her eyes, not with anger, with clarity, like a man who had been searching for an answer for a long time and had finally found it. "Every look from you, every 'I love you,' every touch. Everything is a performance, and I believed in you. I believed in you more than in myself. And you?" She opened her mouth, but he raised his hand. "No need. I don't want to listen. Nothing. Not, 'It's not what you think,' or 'It was complicated.' It's all a lie. You just chose. And you didn't choose me." He walked over to the coffee table and picked up the printout. "Do you recognize it?" He handed it to her. Laura read the first lines. "Rich, we need to be careful." Her own handwriting. Her own words. She closed her eyes as if she had been slapped. I put these pieces together slowly, like a puzzle. Videos, messages, details. I didn't want to believe it. I resisted until the very end. I even thought I was going crazy. His voice wavered for the first time. "But you know what's worse? Even when I understood everything, part of me still hoped that you would at least apologize first. But you didn't even do that." She hung her head. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but he felt no pity, no desire to comfort her. Only a distant sadness, as if someone he had known in another life had died. "I packed your things," he nodded at the suitcase and the box. "Everything here is yours. The house, the car, the bills, they're mine. And not because I'm greedy, but because you're not a part of this anymore. This isn't revenge. This is justice. Alex," she whispered, taking a step towards him. "Please, I, I don't know why it happened this way. It wasn't planned. It was a mistake." "No, Laura." He stopped her with his gaze. "It was a mistake to trust you. Everything else was your choice, a conscious one. You didn't trip and fall on his lips, did you?" She turned away, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I was lonely," she breathed out. "You became distant. You were always somewhere in my thoughts, at work, on the phone. Couldn't you just tell me that?" he asked, his voice growing a little louder. "Couldn't you just tell me you weren't okay? That you missed me? We were a team, Laura. We'd been through so much. And you didn't even try to fight for us. You just went out there and sold it all for a few kisses in a car." He walked up to the door and opened it. Cold air rushed into the house. "I would forgive everything. Hell, I would even forgive betrayal if you came and told the truth. Yourself, earlier. But now it's too late. Too late." She stood in the middle of the room, small, broken, and so far away, as if there were kilometers between them. "You traded our home, our life. Me for the wrong brand of chewed latex," he said, almost whispering now. "Congratulations. I hope it was worth it." Laura stood still, her face wet with tears, but she didn't move. Alex waited, his hand still on the door handle. He wasn't going to force her out. He wanted her to leave on her own, to take that step of surrender. The seconds dragged on like an eternity, and finally she moved. She picked up her bag, then reached for her suitcase, her movements slow, as if she hoped he would stop her. But he didn't. He watched her pick up the box, her shoulders sag under its weight as she stepped over the threshold. As she stepped out onto the porch, he closed the door behind her without another word. The sound of the lock clicking into place was finality. He walked back into the living room, his footsteps echoing in the empty house. He sat on the couch, staring at the TV, the last frame of the video still frozen. His chest tightened, but he refused to let his emotions get the better of him. He had done what he had to do. Laura had been a hypocrite, and now she was facing the consequences. Alone, Alex began to consider the implications. He knew Laura would probably go to a friend's house or get a hotel room. He didn't feel guilty she had chosen this path. He opened his laptop and checked the notifications from his monitoring software. Social media was still abuzz with the Richard scandal, but now rumors about Laura were starting to surface. Someone in the agency's corporate chat wrote, "They said it was her in the video." Alex knew her career was on the line, and that was part of his plan. He hadn't sent the video to her colleagues, but the rumors had done their job. He contacted Catherine, informing her that Laura had left the house. The lawyer confirmed that the next step was to file paperwork. She also suggested that she place a temporary restraining order on Laura's access to their joint accounts to protect their assets. Alex agreed, signing the necessary forms online. He also decided to change the locks on the house to prevent Laura from returning. He called a repairman who promised to come in the morning. The night was long. Alex lay awake in the living room with the lights off. He thought about how everything had changed in just a few weeks. His life, which had seemed stable, had collapsed, but he hadn't let himself drown. He had become stronger, more cunning, more ruthless. Laura and Richard had thought they could lie and betray without consequences, but they had been wrong. He had shown them that the truth always found a way out, and that the way was paved with their own mistakes. By morning, he felt a strange relief. The house was empty, but the emptiness was his. He no longer shared it with lies. He got up, made coffee, and began planning the next day. His revenge was complete, but life went on. He knew there would be trials ahead, questions, Laura's attempts to reclaim what she had lost. But he was ready. He was not a victim. He was a man who had restored justice, and now he could move on, leaving her with the emptiness she had created. The sun was rising over the suburbs, filling the streets with a soft golden light. There was a new silence in Alex's house. Now entirely he's not heavy, like the days when he had discovered the betrayal, but calm, almost creative. A year had passed since Laura had left, taking with her a box and a suitcase, and with them the remains of their life together. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, after several court hearings in which Catherine, his lawyer, presented evidence of Laura's infidelity. The judge, a woman with tired eyes and a stern voice, had found Laura guilty, allowing Alex to keep the house, most of the savings, and the car. Laura had received only a small share, barely enough to pay for an apartment in a neighboring area. But for Alex, this was not a victory, just the end of a chapter that had long ceased to be his story. He stood in the backyard, holding a mug of black coffee, looking at the flower bed he had begun to plant the previous spring. The ground, once bare, was now strewn with bright flowers, marigolds, asters, a few lavender bushes. Gardening had become his unexpected passion, a way to regain control of something alive, growing, real. Each flower, each leaf, was his work, his time, his choice. It was his rebirth, not loud, not ostentatious, but quiet, like a seed growing underground. The first months after Laura left were strange. The house felt too big, too empty, but Alex refused to let himself sink into loneliness. He knew depression was waiting around the corner, ready to wash over him like a dark wave, but he was stronger than that. He started small, removing any traces of Laura that remained, her forgotten scarf in the closet, her favorite mug, her photographs on the shelf. He repainted the living room a warm beige, replaced the sofa where they had once sat together with a new one, upholstered in dark blue. These changes weren't just cosmetic, they were symbols of his new life, where he made the rules. His old hobby, photography, had returned to him like an old friend. He had once spent hours wandering the city with his camera, capturing moments, shadows on the pavement, smiles from passers-by, reflections in puddles. Laura had always thought it a waste of time, and he had gradually put the camera away in a drawer. Now he took it out, wiped the lenses, and started again. On weekends, he would drive out to the countryside, to lakes and forests where the light was soft and the silence almost tangible. He photographed sunrises, their delicate pink edges, and sunsets, blazing orange. His pictures began to be published in a local nature magazine, and for him it became more than just a hobby, but a way to see the world in a new way, not through pain, but through beauty. But photography was only part of his transformation. Alex realized that his job at an IT company, where he spent years writing code for other people's projects, no longer brought him satisfaction. He wanted to create something of his own, something that would reflect his intelligence, his ambitions. The idea came unexpectedly during a conversation with a colleague who complained about the lack of convenient applications for managing gardening projects. Alex, inspired by his new hobby, began to develop an application simple but functional, allowing you to plan plantings, track watering, and get advice on plant care. He called it Green Path and put all his programming skills into it. Working on the app became his passion. He spent nights at his laptop, debugging the interface, testing features, and studying the market. He enrolled in an online startup course to understand marketing and user acquisition. 6 months later, he launched a beta version, sending it to friends and gardeners in the local community. The reviews were rave. Intuitive, saves hours, exactly what I was looking for. This gave him confidence. He quit his job, invested his savings into growing the business, and registered the company. GreenPath began to gain popularity, and soon he received his first offer from an investor, a small amount, but with the promise of support for scaling. His days were filled with new energy. He spent the mornings working in the garden, the afternoons meeting with designers and marketers to discuss the brand, and the evenings writing code or planning updates. He felt like a machine, but not a soulless one. His machine was a living, moving purpose. He was no longer a man waiting for life to get better. He was building it himself, brick by brick. New people entered his life as if the world had decided he was ready for them. At a gardening club, he met Matthew, a landscape designer whose irony and easygoing manner reminded Alex of what it was like to laugh without looking back. They spent hours discussing projects while drinking beer in the backyard. Matthew helped him design a new flower bed, and Alex shared ideas for Greenpath, which Matthew enthusiastically supported. Their friendship was easy, without the burden of the past, and that was exactly what Alex needed. At one of the club's meetings, he met Sarah, a woman with warm brown eyes and a smile that seemed as genuine as sunlight. She was a florist, the owner of a small shop in the city center, and her passion for flowers was infectious to Alex. They began talking about plants, how the scent of lavender was calming, how roses required patience. The conversations turned to coffee, then to walks through the botanical garden. Sarah was not Laura, she was straightforward, open, without a hint of deception. Alex was in no hurry, not looking for love, but her presence in his life was like a fresh breeze, clearing the air. He also started going to local trade shows and fairs, presenting Greenpath at small booths. It forced him to step out of his comfort zone, talking to people, convincing them to try his app. He found that he enjoyed this role not just as a programmer, but as someone who inspired others. His confidence grew with each new user, with each positive review. He was no longer the self-doubting Alex who lived in Laura's shadow. He was strong, reserved, a man who knew what he wanted. Sometimes he thought about Laura, but the thoughts were fleeting, like shadows of clouds. He had heard that she had left the agency after a scandal and was now working for a small firm, far from her former glory. He did not hate her, only indifference. She was part of his past, a lesson that had made him who he was. Richard, whose name occasionally flashed in the news due to tax audits, was also just an echo. Alex did not follow them. His life was too full to look back. His home became a reflection of his new identity. The living room, now with wooden shelves filled with books on gardening and photography, was where he entertained friends. The kitchen, where he once cooked dinners for Laura, was now his laboratory, where he experimented with herbs and spices. The backyard was a small oasis, with a wooden bench he had built himself and a hammock where he read in the evenings. All of it was his, not just in right, but in spirit. One day, on his way back from a fair where Greenpath had won an innovation award, he stopped by a lake. The sun was setting, turning the water crimson. He pulled out his camera and took a picture not for the magazine, but for himself. It was all there: the light, the water, the sky, his reflection. He realized he was no longer afraid of loneliness, no longer afraid of the future. He was whole, not because someone was there, but because he had found himself. Alex returned home, turned on the light, and opened his laptop. On the screen was an email from an investor offering a partnership to take Greenpath international. He smiled, taking his time to respond. His life was his own project, and he knew that there were new horizons ahead, which he would meet with the same force that had brought him here. He was a different person, not one who loses, but one who creates. Summer had given way to fall, and the suburbs were awash in crimson and gold. Maple leaves littered the sidewalks, and the air was crisp with a hint of the cold weather to come. Alex's home, now his own sanctuary, reflected his transformation. A neat garden with blooming mums, a renovated living room with wooden shelves filled with books and photographs, and a kitchen where he experimented with new recipes. His life, rebuilt after Laura's betrayal, was full of meaning. His Greenpath app was gaining popularity. His friendships with Matthew and Sarah were joyful, and photography was a way to document a world he now saw more clearly. But the past, like a shadow, sometimes returned, and today it was knocking on his door in the form of Laura. It was early Saturday morning when the doorbell rang, breaking the silence. Alex, who had just finished watering the lavender in the backyard, wiped his hands on his jeans and headed for the front door. He wasn't expecting company. Matthew was up to his neck in deadlines, and Sarah was at a flower fair out of town. He opened the door without any expectations and froze. Laura was standing on the porch. She seemed a stranger in this landscape. Her face was pale, there were bruises under her eyes. Her hair was tangled, as if she had not slept for the second night. Her black coat hung like a sack, as if it had become too big. In her hands was the same bag she had left with exactly a year ago. Alex felt neither excitement nor pain, only icy calm, like a person who had long ago learned to live with a scar. "Alex," she said, her voice shaking like an autumn leaf on a windy day. "Can I come in? Please. We need to talk." He was silent, studying her. The emptiness in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the whiteness of her fingers from clenching. She looked broken, wasted. But that was not his concern now. No longer. He stepped aside, opening the door. Not out of mercy, but out of a desire to close the gestalt. "Speak," he said briefly. She walked into the living room, slowly, like someone stepping into a sacred place where she no longer belonged. Her gaze darted around the room, the new shelves, the sofa, the framed photograph of the lake Alex had taken on a solo trip last summer. Everything was different, foreign, and she felt it. The shock of realization caught her by surprise. Her face trembled, and tears poured from her eyes. "I made a mistake," she breathed, almost silently. "The biggest one of my life. I was stupid, blind, weak. I don't know what came over me. Richard, it wasn't real. It was empty. I thought I felt something, but it was an illusion. He disappeared as quickly as he appeared. And you were always there. And I betrayed him. Not just you, myself too." Alex stood by the window, arms crossed, silent. His face was stone. No hostility, just silence. "I swear I never wanted to lose you. I was just scared. Our days became monotonous. You were always busy in yourself. And instead of talking, I took the easy way out. Stupid, irresponsible." She exhaled convulsively. "And I paid the price. I lost my job, my friends. Emily won't talk to me. My coworkers avoid me. I live in an apartment that smells of mold. And every morning I wake up with one thought. I ruined everything." "And you want what?" Alex finally spoke, without looking away from the window. His voice was even, like a man reading a sentence. "Forgiveness." "I don't dare ask for forgiveness," she whispered. "I want a chance, a small one. I've changed. I understand what loss is, what it means to betray. I'm not the same anymore. And if you still feel, even for a moment, something," her voice broke, "I ask you, give me a chance to bring us back. I'm ready to fight, ready to wait, to move to another apartment, to prove it with deeds, not words. I don't expect instant forgiveness. But I still love you, Alex." He turned to face her, his gaze hard, but with a hint of pain in it. "Love is not just a feeling. It is a choice. It is loyalty, even when it is hard, even when it is boring, even when it seems that everything has faded." He took a step towards her. "And you, Laura, chose not to fight. You chose to betray, more than once, systematically, consciously, carefully, with code phrases, with silence." She sobbed, clutching her bag to her chest like a shield. "I know. I know that I lost. But people make mistakes. We are not machines. We fall, we get confused. You yourself said that anyone can fall. The main thing is to get up." "Yes," he nodded. "But you didn't get up then. You came now, when everything was already destroyed, when you had nowhere else to go. This is not repentance, Laura. This is an escape." She wanted to object, but she couldn't, because he was right. He looked at her for a long time. Then, a little more quietly, "I'm sorry it happened. Honestly. Sometimes I still think about you dancing barefoot in the garden at our wedding. About how you laughed when you dropped a latte on my shirt. Those memories are mine, and I won't let you tarnish them again." She took a step toward him, her hand reaching out as if she wanted to touch him, but he stepped back, his movement light but determined. The gesture stopped her, and she froze, her hand hanging in the air. Alex looked at her, his eyes cold but not cruel. They held the clarity of a man who had made his choice long ago. "You made a choice, Laura," he said, his voice quiet but hard as granite. "You chose him. You chose lies. You chose betrayal. And now it's my turn." Laura shook her head, tears falling to the floor but making no attempt to hide them. "I know it's my fault," she whispered. "I know I hurt you. But I love you, Alex. I've always loved you. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. Please don't push me away. We can start over." Alex almost smiled, not from joy, but from the irony of her words. Start over? As if their past could be erased, as if her lies could be forgotten. He remembered the day he saw the video, how his heart had been torn apart by the pain, how he had fought the anger to keep from drowning in it. He remembered packing her things, closing the door behind her, building his life anew, one step at a time. And now she stood here, asking for what she had destroyed. He shook his head, his gaze softening, not from pity, but from the knowledge that she no longer had power over him. "You don't understand," he said, his tone almost teaching. "This isn't about forgiveness. This isn't about whether I can forget. This is about who I've become. I'm not the man you knew. I'm not the man who will live with the shadow of your lies. You made a choice, and I made mine. My life is mine now, and there's no room for you in it." Laura sobbed, her shoulders slumping as if his words had physically struck her. She started to say something, but he raised his hand, stopping her. He didn't want more words, more tears, more of her trying to bring back what had died long ago. He walked to the door and opened it, letting the cool autumn air in. "Go away, Laura," he said, his voice calm but final. "And don't come back." She stood still, her face wet with tears, but she didn't move. The seconds ticked by, and Alex waited, his hand still on the door handle. He wasn't going to kick her out, he wanted her to leave on her own, to accept that this was the end. Finally, she moved. She picked up her bag, her movements slow, almost mechanical. She looked at him, her eyes searching for any hint of doubt, but found none. She crossed the threshold, her steps crunching on the gravel, and Alex closed the door behind her without another word. The click of the lock was like a period at the end of a sentence. He stepped back into the living room, his gaze sweeping over the room that was now all his. He felt no anger, no relief, only clarity. Laura was part of his past, and her attempt to return only confirmed that he had made the right choice. He was not one to seek revenge out of spite. He was one to choose himself. Alex walked out into the backyard, where the morning sun was illuminating his garden. He picked up his camera and snapped a picture of the chrysanthemums, their petals glowing in the light. The shot wasn't just a photograph, it was a symbol of his new life, where every day was his own. He walked back into the house, turned on his laptop, and checked his email. There was an email from an investor confirming a deal to expand GreenPath internationally. He smiled, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was just the beginning. By midday, he had driven downtown, where Matthew and Sarah were waiting for him at a cafe. They were discussing a new project, a rooftop garden at the local library where GreenPath would be used for planning. Sarah was laughing as she told him about her cat stealing a rose from a store, and Matthew was teasing Alex about his obsession with lavender. Their conversation was light, warm, real. Alex felt part of something bigger than himself, but also whole. That evening, he returned home, turned on the light, and sat at the table with his notebook open. He began jotting down ideas for a new update to GreenPath, a feature that would help users share their gardens with the community. This was his life now, creating, growing, moving forward. He no longer looked back. Laura, Richard, their betrayal, all of it was just a shadow, dissolving in the light of his new reality. The final frame of his story was simple but powerful. He closed the door on Laura, leaving her with her choice, and stepped into his life not with great fanfare, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knows who he is. His garden was blooming, his business was growing, his heart was free. He had started again, and it was his triumph. Each story is a step towards understanding yourself and the world. If this story left a mark on your soul, don't forget to support it with a like and a comment. Subscribe because it only gets stronger, deeper, and more interesting. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.